plant grows faster than corn, requires no fertilizer, survives drought that kills wheat, contains more omega-3 than fish oil, and produces edible leaves in 3 weeks. Agricultural agencies classify it as a noxious weed. Farmers spend billions removing it. Herbicide manufacturers list it as target species number 1. The same plant fed Mediterranean armies, sustained Chinese dynasties through famine, and appears in Egyptian medical texts as a nutritional staple. It now grows in every continent except Antarctica, self-propagates without human intervention, and thrives in soil too depleted for commercial crops. The reclassification was not accidental. Purslane appears in Mediterranean agricultural records 3,000 years before industrial farming existed. Greek physicians documented its use as both food and medicine. Roman military supply chains included it as a standard provision because it required no preservation and remained edible after weeks without water. The plant contains mucilage that seals in moisture, allowing it to survive conditions that wilt lettuce in hours. Egyptian papyri describe cultivation techniques, but the term cultivation misrepresents the process. Purslane requires no planting. Seeds remain viable in soil for 40 years. A single plant produces over 50,000 seeds. Ancient societies did not grow purslane. They managed its inevitable presence. Chinese agricultural texts from the Song dynasty classify purslane as one of the 5 essential famine foods, a category reserved for plants that prevent population collapse when grain systems fail. The classification was not metaphorical. Imperial administrators maintain detailed records of regional food security, and purslane appears consistently in areas that maintain stable populations during multi-year droughts. The plant was not a supplement. It was infrastructure. Mesoamerican civilizations operated under the same framework. Aztec agricultural codices describe amaranth, a related species with identical growth patterns, as a required crop that received the same ceremonial significance as corn. Spanish colonizers banned its cultivation in 1577, not for agricultural reasons, but because the plant had become central to religious ceremonies the church sought to erase. The ban attempted to eliminate a food source that required no European control. The technology is visible in the plant structure itself. Purslane develops a shallow root system that spreads horizontally rather than vertically, allowing it to extract moisture from soil layers that deep-rooted crops cannot access. The stems store water in cellular structures that function identically to cactus tissue, maintaining hydration during extended dry periods. Leaf surfaces contain a waxy coating that reduces evaporation rates to nearly zero, a trait that appears in desert-adapted species but remains functional in temperate climates. The plant does not require drought to activate these systems. They operate continuously, which means purslane uses 80% less water than lettuce to produce the same leaf mass. Traditional societies understood this as passive irrigation. The plant delivers water to itself. Storage follows the same logic. Grain requires drying, pest protection, and controlled environments to prevent spoilage. Purslane remains edible while growing, which eliminates storage as a distinct phase of food production. Ancient populations harvested it continuously rather than seasonally, removing the logistical burden of preserving large quantities at once. The mucilage that allows the plant to retain moisture also prevents bacterial growth on damaged tissue, which means harvested stems remain edible for days without refrigeration. Roman military campaigns lasted months in regions with no supply infrastructure. Purslane grew along the roads. Armies foraged while moving, converting a weed into a distributed food system that required no maintenance. Efficiency appears most clearly in the nutritional density. Purslane contains 7 times the beta-carotene of carrots, 6 times the vitamin E of spinach, and 14 times the omega-3 fatty acids of conventional vegetables. The omega-3 concentration exceeds most fish per gram of edible weight, a characteristic nearly absent in land plants. Protein content reaches 2 grams per 100 gram serving, higher than most leafy vegetables and comparable to legumes. The combination is not accidental. The plant evolved in nutrient-poor environments where inefficient metabolism leads to extinction. Every biological system prioritizes maximum output from minimum input. Purslane is not unusually nutritious. It is appropriately designed for survival. The Irish potato famine killed 1 million people between 1845 and 1852. Regional mortality rates varied by more than 40%, depending on local food diversity. Areas in Western Ireland where populations foraged wild edibles, including plants classified as weeds, experienced significantly lower death rates than regions dependent solely on potato monoculture. Contemporary accounts describe families surviving on foraged greens, nettles, and wild amaranth, species that grew in fields destroyed by blight. The pattern repeated during the Great Depression. The United States Department of Agriculture distributed foraging guides that identified purslane, lamb's quarters, and dandelion as free food sources available in every state. Urban populations in the Midwest harvested weeds from vacant lots. The plants were not emergency food. They were the functional remainder of a food system after the monetized portion collapsed. China experienced 3 major famines in the 20th century. The 1928-1930 drought in northern provinces killed an estimated 3 million people. Survival rates correlated directly with access to famine foods, a category that included purslane, amaranth, and other fast-growing wild edibles. The 1959-1961 famine killed tens of millions, but regional mortality again varied based on local foraging knowledge. Provinces with strong traditions of wild food identification maintained lower death rates than areas where agricultural policy had eliminated foraging as a recognized practice. The variable was not food availability, it was food classification. Populations that recognized weeds as food survived. Populations that recognized only official crops did not. Producing 1 kilogram of beef requires 15,000 liters of water. Producing 1 kilogram of wheat requires 1,000 liters. Producing 1 kilogram of purslane requires 200 liters, and the plant grows without irrigation in most climates, reducing the real figure to whatever rain provides. Land use follows the same ratio. 1 hectare of land produces 200 kilograms of beef, 2,000 kilograms of wheat, or 20,000 kilograms of purslane per year. The purslane figure is conservative and represents unmanaged growth. Deliberate cultivation increases yields by a factor of 3. Carbon emissions per kilogram of edible output are 90% lower for purslane than for grain crops because the plant requires no tilling, no fertilizer, and no mechanized harvest. It grows, you cut it, it grows again. The economics are impossible to monetize, which makes them invisible to systems that measure value through production costs. Subsidies clarify the structure. The United States government spent $20 billion subsidizing corn production in 2023. $0 subsidized purslane. The European Union pays farmers to remove wild edibles from fields under agrochemical management programs. Herbicide manufacturers spend $4 billion annually marketing products designed to kill plants that require no input costs to grow. The herbicide market expanded by 30% between 2000 and 2020, the same period during which industrial agriculture consolidated into systems that require chemical dependency. Purslane is listed as a primary target species by Bayer, Syngenta, and Corteva. The plant is not targeted because it damages crops. It is targeted because it grows without purchase. Language completes the reclassification. The term weed contains no biological meaning. It is an economic designation that identifies plants growing outside monetized systems. Purslane is a weed. Lettuce is a crop. Both are edible leaves. The difference is ownership. Lettuce requires annual seed purchase from patent holders. Purslane propagates itself. The USDA categorizes purslane as a noxious weed in 35 states, a classification that in some jurisdictions makes cultivation illegal. The identical plant appears in farmers' markets in California, labeled as a specialty green, sold for $12 per pound. The biological entity has not changed. The economic context determines whether it is food or pest. The pattern is not unique. Dandelion leaves contain more iron than spinach and more calcium than milk per gram. They grow in every climate zone humans inhabit, require no cultivation, and self-propagate through wind dispersal. Herbicide sales targeting dandelions exceed $1 billion annually. Lamb's quarters, another species classified as a weed, contains more protein than cultivated quinoa and grows 3 times faster. Agricultural Extension Services recommend its removal. Amaranth, banned by Spanish colonizers, produces grain yields comparable to wheat in drought conditions that kill conventional crops. It is classified as pigweed, a Category A noxious species in 14 states. Every plant follows the same trajectory. Traditional food source reclassified as pest, targeted for elimination, removed from public awareness. Climate projections predict 30% reductions in wheat yields by 2050 due to temperature increases and water scarcity. Corn production faces similar declines. Rice, which feeds half the global population, requires flooded fields in regions where water tables are falling by meters per year. Industrial agriculture optimized for 20th century climate conditions. Those conditions are disappearing. The plants classified as weeds are adapted for survival in variable precipitation, temperature extremes, and degraded soil. They are not resilient. They are appropriately adapted to the conditions that are now inevitable. When irrigated monocultures fail, the food system will not transition smoothly to alternatives. It will collapse into whatever grows without infrastructure. That category already exists. It is currently being eradicated. The structural dependency is irreversible under current design. Seed patents require annual purchasing. Mechanized planting requires expensive equipment. Fertilizer application requires nitrogen produced through industrial processes. Herbicide use requires chemical inputs purchased from manufacturers. Each stage creates a point of economic capture where food production requires payment to external entities. Self-propagating plants eliminate every stage. A population that can feed itself with plants that grow without assistance is a population outside economic dependency. The system does not forbid this. It simply reclassifies the plants as something other than food, then removes them systematically. The mechanism is linguistic. The impact is biological. History does not repeat, but the conditions that produce famine remain structurally identical. Dependence on narrow crop varieties, elimination of knowledge about alternative food sources, economic systems that classify survival mechanisms as nuisances. The combination has produced collapse in every civilization that prioritized control over resilience. Egypt fell when grain distribution systems failed. Rome collapsed when supply chains broke. The Aztec Empire was dismantled partially through the elimination of amaranth cultivation. The Irish starved surrounded by edible plants they had been taught to ignore. The variable is not whether food exists, it is whether food is recognized. When the current system becomes unsustainable, the transition will not involve discovering new crops. It will involve remembering what was deliberately erased. The vault is not metaphorical. The knowledge required to survive outside industrial systems still exists in fragments, rural traditions, and the weeds growing through pavement cracks. The plants were never eliminated. The awareness of them as food was. If this vault revealed something they reclassified into invisibility, subscribe to preserve what the system tried to bury. Knowledge remains functional only when it is remembered. The next vault opens soon.